You got it. Get it. Get it. Shout now. Come on, get it, son.
Actually, I knew when I was 3 years old.
When you were 3?
Yes.
And
I used to go and sit on the stoop of Mr. Hayward's in Elkton, Maryland, and listen to him teach other students how to play. I just knew I needed and I wanted to play drums, and I was playing pots and pans from that time. Well, my biggest influence was really my teacher, Mr. Hayward.
Mr. Hayward?
Yes, and he's the one that, he was a high school teacher, but he was also drum teacher for all the drummers in the area, and he also played in the big band, which was the Clyde Bessex Orchestra. Everybody that came into town came to me, came to Elkton, and I should say Cecil County. We would go and they would take me to see the shows. Mr. Hayward. Whatever he played, I was always with him. And I put up the drums, tear them down, and everything else. I was just his little helper. And I was very glad, very happy to be there to do it. It was always a learning process. But with all the different groups that came through town, because everybody, every country, R&B, which wasn't called R&B at the time, pop bands, blues, everybody came through Cecil County. Whether you were on your way south or going north. Everybody stopped there because you had Johnny Sports Arena, which could handle thousands of people, and you had the Armory that would hold, I'd say, 2,000, 2,500, but it was a place that we gathered, and there was always something going on every weekend in the area. So it was like home. It was home for me, but it was like everything that you could possibly want. Every name artist came through town. I used to help set up their equipment because Mr. Hayward would allow me to do that. My first experience with James Brown was at the Apollo Theater. I was the house drummer at the Apollo Theater, working with the different groups that came through town, and every week there was always somebody. So half the time they bring their own band. The other half is that they come by themselves, so they made more money when they had a band that could play their music. So that means they didn't have to divvy up their money and have their band play, which was normal. That's a normal kind of thing going on. But that was my first experience, was playing with James Brown. From there, we did some live recording, and one of the first songs that I did with him, which is 1961, 62, was Please, Please, Please. That was one of my all-time favorites with him. And I finally got the credit that the best version of that was the live version that we did. And that was me playing the drums. But then in the studio went so different, because by this time, being in the studio, I had a little reputation of making all these demos. And I was doing rather well, quite well at that time. So you're dealing with 63, 4, 5, 6 in that time. It was Bernard Purdie. And it wasn't even then Bernard, I was called Pretty Purdie. They had dropped my name, the front of my name, and it was so much easier for them, and they called me Pretty Purdie. So we did, not only did we do James himself, but we also did his band. He had different names for the different bands. He had different labels that he put music on, whether it was on Mercury or different name. They all had their own different names of the record labels at the time. But James would do 3 or 4 different sessions during the course of an evening. We might cut a whole record in an evening, whether it was instrumental or whether it was background singers, the famous Flames, or regular studio musicians, background. But all of this was done by a young man named Sammy Lowe, Mr. Sammy Lowe. It was the arranger for all of those records. We had Maceo, many different groups, different people that came in the band, but they all came later. But Mr. Lowe, Sammy Lowe, was the arranger for all of those hit records that was going on in the beginning. We had Pee Wee Ellis that came later. He was in the band, but we weren't doing his arrangements. Sammy Lowe was the arranger, and he was arranging for whether it was for 10-piece band or 25-piece band. Didn't matter. It was Mr. Lowe, Sammy Lowe. And that made me very, very happy. And then, of course, he also did it for strings and background singers and all. So the band might end up being 30 to 35 pieces, easily. But with James, it was all or nothing. You either did it and you did it his way, or you didn't do it. But Mr. Lowe was unique. That man was super unique because he listened to what James Brown wanted, and he got it every time, because he'd write it out. He'd sing it, and he'd write it out. And yeah, that's it, that's exactly what I want. We always had 3 guitar players on the recording session. We always had 2 drummers and a percussionist on recording sessions. But then you had the bass player. One was Al Lucas, who played the upright bass all the time. And then with my bass player, Bob Bushnell, and Wilbur Bascom. That was Wilbur Bascom Jr. It was amazing. Somebody who could play the lines and be perfect and be right on with the feel and the groove, never change it. That was Wilbur. He held all of us in line. We'd all have to follow him. And the energy that he got when he played that bass, you had to be on top of everything, because Wilbur didn't slap for anybody or anything. And he was also the house bass player for the Apollo at the time. That was normal. And I hate to make it don't sound super interesting. Oh yes, it really was. But the man knew what he wanted. He could sing the parts, or he'd sit down and play it on the organ. Didn't play piano. He could play it on the organ. He didn't read music or anything of that nature, but he knew the sound that he wanted. So, to answer that question, and at the same time, just to let you know, we could never call him James. it was always Mr. Brown. That's number one. So the respect was always there. The other part of that is that when somebody knew what he wanted, he didn't have any problem at all with anything. I'm going to come right back. Tim, I'm going to call you back in at 20 minutes. Okay. I'm sorry. That's Arizona. I'm waiting for him for. But to get back to the part with Mr. Brown, you had to call him Mr. Brown, number one. Then you had to understand he knew what he wanted. He didn't know how to tell most of us, so he'd tell Mr. Lowe, Mr. Sammy Lowe. And every time this man would write it, he'd put it down on paper. So there was no excuse for not being able to follow James Brown at all for anything that he wanted, because he knew exactly what he wanted. And working with this, it always sounded like we never had music, because it always sounded like feel. We just get into this positive attitude of what we did. And it was always that. But it was the feel that made everything work and everything to happen. But that is because the people that he selected, you had to have somebody who could read the music, you had to have somebody who could interpret the music, then you had to have somebody who could really play the music. And if you couldn't do all those, you weren't on the date. It was really, truly that simple. So you had all of these elements coming together. And for me, it was an exceptional, because I did come with something that others didn't have. I didn't know that. I didn't know that then. Because I came in, it was easy for me because I could read the music. So half the drummers that he had didn't read music. They do everything by feel, and they follow everybody else. Well, I did. I read the music, but I also interpreted and brought my own feel into it. And that was the thing why Mr. Lowe was so happy to have me. It wasn't James. It wasn't Mr. Brown at first. It was Mr. Lowe, because I did what he said do on that music, and then put it to use in the studio. Most drummers either played live or played in the studio. They didn't do both. So consequently, that's what I did, especially in the early 60s. I had something that most didn't have. I could turn it on and off, just like that. But I always knew where one was. And no matter what happened, whether it was the one or whether it was the two, I knew where to put it, where and how to place it. And after being there, after a while of playing everybody else's music and style, I came in with my own thing that also, instead of being necessarily on the one and the two, it was on the three. But it was on the three because it was halftime, and my figures and the things that I was doing was a 2-bar phrase that has later become to the world the Purdie Shuffle. Because we all had to play shuffle music because that's the way it was. And when James came along, we were doing 8-note feels, not necessarily dotted, but putting that technical term to it, we had to learn how to shift. Instead of being all straight, I learned how to put a dot into it and play it halftime. So the Purdie Shuffle represents all of the beats and all of the notes actually in a 2-bar phrase. But the placement is what makes it different than most. And believe me, it is now something that's taught all over the world. But in the beginning, good old-fashioned shuffle. Do, 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 do. We all had to play that in order to play the dance music. Do, 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 do. When you had this, you got 50 to 60% of the music that you had to know. But then when I came along, I tried to change that. And I did. And when I changed it, that's where and how the Purdie Shuffle came into being. But it's not a 1-bar phrase, it's a 2-bar phrase. That was the hard part of what the Purdie Shuffle was about. Had to teach it to others around the world. So James did everything funky. Yes, but it had to have a groove. Everything had to be groovy. Soulful is what you put underneath. That was Mr. Lowe. He could take that and put it under and make all of that rhythm work with one another. Cold Sweat. Same kind of thing. Where you place those horns and where the rhythm was being played, between Wilbur Bascom and myself, how we came together, we just made things work. Nobody, I have never seen anybody ever in the business who could outthink, outread Wilbur Bascom, the bass player. If you're reading the music and a fly falls on a spot on that page, he'd play it. That's how good he was. And not miss a thing. Not miss a thing. Well, you're going to be very, very surprised. The Rock Steady, the record itself, when we did the date in New York at Atlantic Studios, my drum solo in Rock Steady was an accident. We were playing, we were grooving so much in there, in the studio, the music fell off the piano, and Aretha was signaling to somebody to come, get the music, because it's gone. We kept on going. We never stopped. And when she got to the point of a place where it was rock and the breakdown, steady, rock, steady. We just kept on going. We actually kept on going till somebody came out, Aretha Martin came out, picked up the music and put it back on the piano. She loved it so much that she kept it in the song, the break. The thing is that when we did the break, that break was so awesome while everything was going on that for us, we couldn't duplicate it the same way. Again, Aretha Martin ended up clipping and putting the solo in another tape because we never got back to that same feel with super attitude, and everybody we were just all fired up because Aretha was at the piano and she was singing. It's like doing something live. Now, whether she was going to keep the vocals or not, none of us ever knew. But we would try to work in isolation as much as we can because so they could separate it. Well, they kept one of the few people in the world who could take the 24 track, cut it, and paste it and put it together was Aretha Franklin. Dynamite. His arranging, he arranged things according to what the rhythm section, what we did, and how we played together as a unit. He would be there and rewrite. He would rewrite some of his own arrangements that he had something before because the rhythm changed in the studio. What we played in the studio, 99% of the time, was always exactly what it was supposed to be. Another one of the examples with Aretha was Until You Come Back to Me. Well, Until You Come Back to Me, the way that was done, the vocal and the drums were on equal terms and equal level. He rewrote his arrangement because of what we did. What I did, Chuck Rainey, Cornell Dupree, and Donny Hathaway, and the different ones that were there. He changed everything to make it work with us, what we did in the studio. It was the exact same thing with Rocksteady. Rocksteady, the break, was an accident. We just never stopped playing, and we kept on going. And it was absolutely wonderful. Well, besides that, what that did for me is everybody in the world is calling me a superstar for my solo. Well, that solo has been used on hundreds of records. Now, I didn't get paid for all those other records. She did, because that sampling went to her because it was her date. They didn't pay me. I wish they had, but now, after all so many years, the people finally started to call me because I wasn't 90 years old and I was still playing. And they came after me and started asking me to do my own sampling and selling it to the different people. Well, Rocksteady put me on the map worldwide. It did. But it also put a cap on it for me, put a real topping, because the people went back and found out about James Brown. They found out about Donny Hathaway, Roberta Flack. I could give you the list of over 2,500 artists that I worked with over the last 50 plus years. For me, my lifetime part for me of 2,500 different artists that I worked with now gave me the title because I'm on over 4,000 albums.
Wow.
That's why they now call I'm the most recorded drummer. Not being in the studio the most, but all the different artists and the music that came out, because they don't record that way anymore. I was recording 1 or 2 artists in a day. It was amazing. I might have had 5 or 6 artists during the week. I was doing 3 and 4 sessions a day. You do their work and you move on to the next thing. All day. Sometimes it's just different artists, same day. And one of the best examples, and I'll make sure that I get that article to you. Guy followed me. News guy followed me for one day. He picked a day. He called me up and said, okay, I'd like to follow you one day and to see what you do. I said, fine. This was from the New Yorker magazine. The guy calls up and says, okay, today's the day. And tomorrow, he said, well, we're starting early. I have my first session at 8 o'clock in the morning. 8 o'clock? Yes, I said, I have commercials to do. 8 o'clock to 9 to 9:20, and then I go to do 10 o'clock recording session. That goes 10 to 1 with a possible hour, 2 to 5 with a possible half hour, then 7 to 10, and whatever. Well, that day, that particular day, was one of the best commercials I had ever done. Got paid. It was a beer commercial at the time. Did that commercial. Went to the recording studio that day from 10 to 1 to 2 to 5. Did Nina Simone. 7 o'clock, go out, have dinner, and then I do James Brown. We end up going till 3 o'clock in the morning. Now, the thing that got to him, to the writer, he said, I have never seen anybody walk into the recording studio just like just the first thing in the morning on each day. I said, what do you mean? He said, you walked in like you had just started your day and you were fresh and did everything and you were doing things in 1 and 2 takes and you I said, well, that's part of my job. I said, I'm talking about all day from 8 o'clock in the morning till you finished at 3 o'clock in the morning. You did not break down to slow down for anything. You were steady working. And those dates, they were phenomenal. Every one of them. He said, they all became hit records. I said, oh, good. That's all I can say. But that's the way it was. And I had a ball. I just enjoyed myself. And the camaraderie that we had with musicians at that time was remarkable. Because it was like a big family. You do a few things. You work together. You ate together. It's like almost sleeping together. That's what we did. That was part of the job. That was part of it. And we knew each other. The musicians, I'm telling you, had 50 to 100 musicians at the time making all these records. Not the same ones. 50 to 100. They were making so many records. We made 40 or 50% of the records at that time. Hit records. Hit records. So it was a great time for me. I mean, it really was. And those are the times that you don't forget when those things happen. Aretha Franklin. That is the safest thing that I could say and do because everybody in the world loves Aretha. So what I did with Aretha, there was so many hit records, and here she's still the queen of soul. Okay, Purdie, Steely Dan didn't come down on me. King Curtis didn't. Count Basie, Duke Ellington. All of them. I love them all. I love them all. But safety, Aretha Franklin. Well, that experience was phenomenal. Because that's the first time in my entire life that I got the credit. Now, I have been doing films, many, many films by that time. Cotton Comes to Harlem, Felix the Cat. I could give you, To Serve with Love. I have over 125 different films that I have recorded. And before Lila was done, I had at least 50 to 60 films in, as they say, in the box. But Lila was the first time that I actually got credit. I was the composer, I was the writer, and I actually owned the master. Wasn't happening. One of the first people who started owning masters was Isaac Hayes, Shaft. Was one of the first ones. Well, I did mine at the same time that Shaft was happening. It was done around the same time. Because I knew what the business was like, because I learned the business. I was learning it. So that was my first time. It was also the first time for a black X-rated movie. I wrote all the music, and my daughter wrote the lyrics for Lila itself. But I sang it. People didn't know that I sang. Okay, that's all right, but that was known. But the beauty for me was having that and actually recording it and getting the credit as the composer, as the producer, as the writer and publisher, and owning my own master. It was a big thing. It's part of the best time of my life, because at my age now, to be able to still be able to play, still being able to be needed and wanted around the world. I am traveling. I travel very well. I travel doing a good job for people, but I'm earning good money still. And that is the beauty for me. I'm also earning part of my royalties from all those years ago. It's now coming to me. But I had to go out and get other people, business people, to do that. Because I don't have the time. I'm having a ball. I teach, I speak, I give lessons, I give everything that you can possibly think of in the music business. My lectures are worldwide lectures because I bring everybody together. And I stopped being bitter 40 years ago. You don't get anything. You get absolutely nothing. So, if you're smart enough, you hang in there, but you learn to be a little bit humble. You can get what you want. You still got to realize it's somebody else's world. We can live in it. We can enjoy it. We can do all kinds of things, but it doesn't belong to us. We're part of it. And as long as you understand that, you'll do really well. Ownership is something that you work for. You put it together, you nourish it until it works for you. Well, it's going to work for me, especially in the next 5 to 10 years. I'm happy as a lark. I just want to be able to live long enough to enjoy that other side. I never thought ever of being rich. I'm rich in my rewards of what I do. I have learned to live comfortably. I have learned to do the things that I want to do. You don't have to have a whole lot of money to do that. You just got to take care of yourself and live long enough that people will help you as you go along. But being bitter doesn't work. I've been blackballed, blacklisted. I've had it all because of the Beatles. Beatles didn't make me. Beatles did not make me. I am who I am because of the work that I have done and all of the different artists that I have worked with. And I mean 2,500 different artists that I have worked with in the last 55 years, almost 60 years. I don't have a problem being happy about what I've done because I've satisfied so many, but I've done even better. I've satisfied me. I have satisfied me. And I mean exactly what I said. Being bitter, y'all got it. Takes too much work. Takes too much work to do that, to be there. So I leave it alone. Go along with the program and bam, do what's necessary. What I've put in my book is a smidget of what happened. I am so sorry that I opened that can of worms because if I'd have known that my life was going to be threatened as it was and blackballed and blacklisted from this business, I'm not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame because they didn't like the idea of me talking about the Beatles fixing their tracks. I fixed 21 tracks. That's it. But it hurt me. It has hurt me in the business itself. I got people, oh, you're lying, you this and you that. And I had my life threatened on the air many times. Not just once, but many times. And then I finally had to say, hey, I don't need this. I don't need it. So I've had to back away from it. And it's the best thing that I can do. I've even had my lawyers tell, Ringo don't have to do anything. He is the Beatles. He don't have to do a thing. He don't have to say yes or no to anything. That is what, when it starts to come down the pike about defending yourself, you don't have to defend yourself. You don't have to do anything whatsoever. Go find out for yourself. Check this out. Check that out. Check out a few other folks. Find out for yourself. That's what I'm happy about. Okay. They did not make me. 2,500 other artists did. And it's a whole nother world for me. That's why I feel good about it. My legacy, people love the Purdie Shuffle. It works. I'll be remembered and I'll be in the history books for the rest of my life. There's hundreds, literally thousands of records that the Purdie Shuffle is on. That it's on. Can't deny what's already there. It is my name. It is what I created. And nobody can take that from me because it's there. Those records are still selling. They are still selling. And feel, time, that's what my legacy is. He did it his way. And it worked.